Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we're continuing from this masla then. So far we've been talking about Ma'adin and Rikaz. Ma'adin, the Hanafi say, is precious ores that are found in the ground, solids, metals. And Rikaz is hidden, buried treasure. So buried treasure is called Rikaz. So previously we mentioned about the if you find ma'adin in your own property, what's the ruling? What if you find it in your garden? What's the ruling? What if you find it in public land? What's the ruling? So we talked about all of that. And Imam Abu Hanifa, if you find it in your own land, like your garden, there's two riwayas. We finished on this. Yeah, one riwayah was in the Asl and one riwayah was in the Jami al-Saghir. So he says, وَإِنْ وَجَدَ رِكَازًا. So now we're talking about the next thing now, which is rikaz. Rakaza yarkazu, which means something which is planted, firmly placed. A kanzan. So he interprets rikaz as meaning kanz, buried treasure. Wajaba fihi al-khumus. Khumus is going to be necessary according to us. Lima rawayna. Yeah, because of the hadith that we mentioned, that in Ma'adin, rikaz, the first hadith that we brought, which was fir rikazi al-khumus. And we said rikaz includes both ma'adin and also buried treasure as well. Lima rawayna, this is because of this hadith. And what ismu rikaz yutlaq al-kanz. The word rikaz is used for buried treasure. Lima'na rakaz, because the word rikaz is from the word rakaz, which has that built inside of it, the meaning. Wa huwa al-ithbat, which means something being firmly placed or firmly established. Yeah, so if you dig your garden and let's say you find some buried treasure, you have to give a khumus of that. Now there's different scenarios. For example, like, is this from a Muslim's property? Is it Muslim buried treasure? Is it non-Muslim buried treasure? Yeah, what is it? Where is it from? Is it in a land that was previously owned by non-Muslims? Or is it owned by Muslims? So all these things would make the masala, would affect the ruling outcome. ثم إن كان على ضرب أهل الإسلام. Then, if the buried treasure كان على ضرب أهل الإسلام. ضرب أهل الإسلام means it's according to the way of the people of Islam, meaning its design seems to be something Muslims would own. Like, he gives an example. He says كالمكتوب عليه كلمة الشهادة. Like, this is some coins and those coins have the shahada written on them. Yeah, so if there's coins and these coins have shahada written on them, then that seems to indicate that the previous owners were Muslim. Now, that doesn't have to be the case. Maybe non-Muslims own some coins that have shahada on them as well. Yeah, so maybe there's some non-Muslims that got hold of some Muslim coins. Could be, but generally we assume that if there's shahada on there, the word Allah is on there, some ayats are written on there, or any other Islamic decorations on there, we would assume it to be something that belongs to Muslims. Or if you had some Muslim name on there, yeah, so a Muslim name like Zayd or Muhammad or Abdullah. فَهُوَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ اللُّقْطَةِ. In that case, you're not allowed to keep it, right? Because it is now in the ruling of lost property, luqta. Yeah, so luqta is a whole chapter in fiqh related to this. This is in reference to, lost property. So if you were walking on the street and you found lost property on the road, then the ruling of this is that you're not allowed to keep it. Yeah, you have to tell the people that you've found something and they come identify it and it belongs to them. So he says, وَهُوَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ اللُّقْطَةِ. This, even though you found it in the ground buried, it's not in the ruling of rikaz, buried treasure. It's in the ruling of luqta. وَقَدْ أُرِفَ حُكْمُهَا فِي مَوْضِعِهِ. And its ruling is known in its place. Yeah, so what does that mean then? So for example, like if its value is very small, then you make an announcement for a week or so. And if no one comes forward, then you give it to charity. And if you're poor yourself, you can use it. And likewise, if it's expensive, then you make an announcement for about a year or so. And if it's something which is, if the owners come forward, then you give it to them. If they don't come forward, then you give it to charity. However, if you do give it to charity in all cases and the owners still come forward, then you have to compensate them. Yeah, so you just have to remember that. Okay, وَإِنْ كَانَ عَلَى ضَرْبِ أَهْلِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. However, if it has a design which is according to the ways of Jahiliyyah, because remember, Imam Abu Hanifa and the Sahibain are like almost 100, 150 years after Jahiliyyah, you can say. So therefore, there's going to be a lot of stuff, treasure that's going to be remaining from Jahiliyyah times. And nowadays, there's going to be very little. I mean, obviously, we living in the West, the UK, there's different rulings for us because we're living in, you can almost say, Dar al-Harb. So therefore, the treasure that's found is going to have a slightly different ruling. So he says, anyway, he says, وَإِنْ كَانَ عَلَى ضَرْبِ أَهْلِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. If the design is according to the Ahl al-Jahiliyyah, كَالْمَنْقُوشِ عَلَيْهِ الصَّنَمِ. For example, let's say there's a design of an idol on there. Muslims wouldn't keep that. Muslims wouldn't have something that has idols on there. Then, if that's the case, then it means that the person, obviously, that has left it here was a non-Muslim. فَفِيهِ الْخُمُسِ. In that case, there's khumus. You have to give 1/5 of that to the Baytul Mal. Yeah, فَفِيهِ الْخُمُسِ عَلَى كُلِّ حَالٍ. In all cases. Yeah, so whether you find it in your own land, remember last week we mentioned about the 4 types of land. So whether you find it in your own property, private property, whether you find it in someone else's private property, or whether you find it in public property or ard mubaha, in any case, wherever you find it, you have to give a khumus. Lima bayyana. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention is when you have khumus, who do you give the khumus to? So I said to you, you give it to the Bayt al-Mal. So in Badaya Sunnah, he mentions that this can also be given to people who are poor, even if they're in your family, meaning the rules of zakat don't apply to them. So khumus, the rules of zakat do not apply to khumus. Just remember that. So you can give it, let's say you have poor parents, you can give it to your poor parents, you can give it to your poor children, because the rules of zakat don't apply to it. So 1/5 is given as khumus, and then the other 4/5, 80% of it, you keep. ثم إن وجده في أرض مباحة. Then if it is found in just land that's mubaha, that's open for everyone. Yeah, allowed for everyone. So for example, in a desert or in some mountain somewhere in the Muslim lands. فأربعة أخماسه للواجد. Then 4/5, meaning 80% is going to go for the finder, as finders. لأنه تم الإحراز منه, because the finding of ihraz means to get hold of it. Getting hold of it was done by this individual. Yeah. So لأنه تم الإحراز منه, because the ihraz was done by the finder. إذ لا علم به للغانمين. Yeah, because there was no knowledge of this for the غانمين. So what does he mean by there's no knowledge of this for the غانمين? So what he means basically is that when you find something in public land, this is not similar to finding it in a battle. So if you're in a battle, like we mentioned last lesson, if there's 10 of you and you find something, that thing has to be shared between all 10 individuals, even though the finder was only one. In this case, if the finder is one, other people out there don't get anything. It's all yours. So, like nowadays people go around with metal detectors, going around finding stuff. Yeah, so again, so it belongs to, 80% belongs to you and 20% belongs to the khumus. إِذْ لَا عِلْمَ بِهِ لِلْغَانِمِينَ. Because over here, there's no knowledge of this for the ghanimin. It's not like a war. In a war, the ghanimin, the soldiers are there and they have some sort of knowledge that they're going to gain something. Like they have a shared. فَيَخْتَصُ هُوَ بِهِ. So therefore, he is the haqiqi. He is the haqiqi owner of this. If you remember last week, we talked about the idea of the haqiq, yad haqiqiyya and yad hukmiyya. Yeah, so in this case, the ghanimins, in this case, they don't have a yad hukmiyya in this. They only have a yad hukmiyya when it comes to the non-Muslim lands. When the Muslims go to fight in the non-Muslim lands, that's only when they have. Okay, so that's what he wants to point out. ثم تم الإحراز منه إذ لا علم به للغانمين, because there was no knowledge of this for the غانمين. فيختص هو به. So therefore he is unique in this meaning. He is unique, exclusive, has exclusive rights to it. وَإِنْ وَجَدَهُ. However, so this is all if he's found in ard mubaha, like a desert or mountains, right, which is not public property and it's not private owned. وَإِنْ وَجَدَهُ فِي أَرْضٍ مَمْلُوكَةٍ. However, what if he finds it in ard mamluka? in owned land, private land. فَكَذَا الْحُكُمْ عِنْدَ أَبِي يُوسُف. Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah says the ruling is going to be the same. Yeah. Now, Imam Abu Yusuf actually has a book which is called Kitab al-Kharaj. So Kitab al-Kharaj is a very good book, I would say, to read, because it was one of the earliest books in Islam written for economy, the Muslim economy, the Muslim finances. So this was a very important book in the early years because he wrote it to show how the government needs to spend, how they spend, how income comes in, where it needs to be saved, and where it can be distributed. So this book, Al-Kharaj, Kitab Al-Kharaj, it's available. In fact, if I show you on Turath, it's also available on Turath. So, 1 second. Show you guys. So you can just do a quick search on Turath. Just type in like Rikaz or something, and in Kitab Al-Kharaj, it'll come up. Turath. So for example, if you type in Ar-Rikaz, and then just go to Al-Kharaj, Kitab Al-Kharaj, the Abi Yusuf, there it is, that's the one. And see over here, it brings it all up. So this is a book, it's a short book, it's not very long. It's not from the Zahir Riwayah, by the way. But Abu Yusuf, obviously, he's the Qadi al-Qudat, so he wrote this book. So for example, over here he says, Al-Qawlu fi Rikaz, Amma Rikaz, fahuwa al-dhahab wal-fidda alladhi khalaqahu Allah. So he takes the meaning of Rikaz here as Madin. Remember we said Rikaz can have two meanings, Madin and Kanz. فَمَنْ أَصَابَ, so he says, فَمَنْ أَصَابَ كَنْزًا عَادِيًا في غير ملك أحد فيه ذهب أو فضة أو جوهر أو ثياب فإن في ذلك الخمس وأربعة أخماس للذي أصابه. So the one who finds it. وهو بمنزلة الغنيمة يغنمها القوم فتخمس وما بقي فلهم. So it's treated like ghanima, but there's no one else to give it to. So because there's no other ghanimin there, there's no other ghanim, it's not like a war. Therefore, he gets full rights to it. قال ولو, so this is the other masla. So you can check in there as well. So I'll leave that over there. And then let's go back to this masla. So Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah has discussions on this anyway that you can check out. He says, according to Imam Abu Yusuf, if you find it in public property, public land, the ruling is the same. What's the ruling is the same? Meaning, Khumus goes to the poor people and 80% goes to the finder. لأن الاستحقاق بتمام الحيازة وهي منه. The reason is because istihqaq, the right. So let's say, for example, I go to your garden and I dig your garden, and in your garden I find some buried treasure. We're in a Muslim country. I deserve 80% of it, and 20% goes to the khumus. You don't get anything. You get nothing. So he's saying, because the rule is that istihqaq is only when there is tamam al-hiyaza. Haza yahizu, it means to gain, to attain. So he is the one that attained it, found it. He's the finder, the wajda. Therefore he gets the right. Wahiya minhu. And this came from him. So in other words, he was independent in finding this without your help. And just because it was in your land, it doesn't mean it belongs to you. Right? Because it's not your property. It clearly belongs to someone else. It's a treasure from someone else. That's the argument that Abu Yusuf presents. Okay. وَإِنْدَ أَبِي حَنِيفَ وَمُحَمَّدٍ, and according to Abu Hanifa Muhammad. Now, remember we said when the word inda is used, inda does not necessarily mean that Abu Hanifa and Muhammad has said this, but inda means according to their madhab, based upon what they've said in other things. هُوَ لِلْمُخْتَطِّ لَهُ. This will belong to the person for whom the land originally was carved out when it was distributed by the Muslim government. So the first Muslim owner that it was carved out for, it's going to go to them. So let's say you've got a property. You live in a Muslim land. This is your property. In a Muslim land. Before you, there was, let's say, person A. And before them, there was person B. And before them, there was person C. And you go all the way back. Person Z, person Z, who originally was the one that the land was carved out for. The government gave them that land originally when it was conquered. they are the ones that have rights in this if they're still alive. Yeah, it belongs to them. هو للمخطط له. مخطط له means the one that the land was خطط was drawn out for. هو الذي ملكه. This is the one for whom the Imam ملكه, he gave it as ownership. هذه البقعة, this piece of land. وأول فتح, when it first was conquered. Yeah, so Imam Abu Hanifa and Muhammad would say this belongs to them. It doesn't belong to you, doesn't belong to me, it belongs to them. Why? Because they're going back to that issue again. لأنه سبقت يده إليه. Because originally when he got the land, it's like his hand got to it first. Although physically he didn't know it was there. But his hand got to it first. وهي يد الخصوص. And this is the hand which has exclusive rights. فيملك بها ما في الباطن. So just like he owns what's on top of the land, he also owns what's in the land, inside the land. Now obviously, to what extent does he own what's in the land? How far do you go down? So I don't know, in this country I think there's some laws in the government of how far down you own. So if you own a house, you own property, how many meters down do you go? So there's some sort of like laws that they have in this country. There's a certain amount after that you don't own. Yeah. So here he says that the original person for whom the land was carved out for. وَإِنْ كَانَتْ عَلَى الظَّاهِرِ. Yeah. However, what if a person finds something on top of the land, not inside the land? So it's on top of it. So if it's inside the land, according to Abu Hanifa and Muhammad, it would be considered for the original person for whom the land was given, the deeds were given to. وَإِنْ كَانَتْ عَلَى الظَّاهِرِ. And if, however, the goods were found on top of the land, it was just laying there. كَمَنْ اصْطَادَ سَمَكَةً. For example, like someone who fishes, yeah, who throws their net in the sea and they capture a big fish. في بطنها درة. And they cut it open, and inside they find inside of its belly there's a pearl. Yeah, durra. ملك الدرة. Then in that case, it doesn't go to the person for whom the land was carved out, because there's no carving out, because the fish is on top of the land, it's in the water. So in that case, it belongs to the person who found it. ثم بالبيع لم تخرج عن ملكه. Yeah, and then ثم بالبيع لم تخرج عن ملكه. And even if he was to sell that fish, like let's say he didn't cut it open, he sold that fish. لم تخرج عن ملكه. That durra would still be belonging to you. So if you did the fishing, you captured the fish, you sold the fish, and then you found out that there was a pearl in there. Legally, that pearl is for you. لأنه مودع فيها. Because it will be treated like a trust, wadi'ah, that's been left in something. Like imagine you sell someone a wallet and it has your bank cards in there. The bank cards belong to you. Or you sell someone a car and it has some stuff in the boot. Those belong to you. Yeah. So the idea is that this is how you look at it. بخلاف المعدن. As opposed to the ruling of Madin. Yeah, like we said, Madin is the ores, precious ores, the metals. As opposed to ores. لأنه من أجزائها. Because ores are different from treasure. Treasure has been put there. Ores are considered to be part of the earth. Yeah, they're part of the earth. Even though gold is not earth, but because it's in the earth originally, it's as though Allah created it in the earth. لأنه من أجزائها فينتقل إلى المشتري. So therefore, if someone was to sell someone land, let's say you sold your land to another person, they purchased it. That gold that's in the land, now it transfers to them now. It's no longer yours, because that gold or that silver or whatever's in that land now is like part of the land. Does everyone understand the difference? Yeah. And these differences are very important. Like I always mention this to you guys. You should know the differences between masail. Learn the ashbah, learn the nadha'ir, learn the subtle differences between two masail. That's one key part, I would say, of fiqh that would give you like a deep insight into how fiqh works. If you have a good way, a subtle way of looking at a certain masala, like there's two masalas, you can tell the difference between these two masalas because of one differing factor. Then your level of faqaha is very subtle. You have a very good level of way of looking at things from a fiqh point of view. But if you can't tell the subtle difference between the two, then obviously you still need a lot of training. So here, that's the thing that he wants to point out here. Madin is different. If you were to sell the land, when it's got treasure in there, that original treasure will still belong to the first guy who the land was given to, right? And even if it's passed on from one hand to another, to another, to another, the original treasure still belongs to the first guy. That's what he wants to prove. And Madin, on the other hand, is not like that. The original guy, because he sold it, he sold the land with everything in it. Everything that was indigenously or naturally found in it. وَإِن لَمْ يُعْرَفْ الْمُخْتَتْ لَهُ. Okay, now what if we don't know? So let's say, for example, you sold, let's say, for instance, Zafar sells me the land. Yeah. And this land obviously has gold in there. And Zafar is the original guy who the land was carved out for. So he's the original person. Now, if I know who Zafar is, or the government knows, they've got documents, then that the kanz that's found in the land is going to be handed over to Zafar. What if we don't know who was the original owner? We don't have their details. وَإِن لَمْ يُعْرَفَ الْمُخْتَتْ لَهُ يُصْرَفْ إِلَى أَقْصَى مَالِكٍ يُعْرَفْ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ عَلَى مَا قَالُوا. So the early Hanafis don't have anything about this. Later Hanafis have mentioned certain things. So they've said what you do is you go back as far as possible and you find the earliest Muslim that owned this, the details of the earliest Muslim. So let's say, for example, there's 10 people that own this land. We don't know the original 10th person, but we know the 9th person. Or we don't know the 10th and 9th person, we know the 8th person. Or we don't know the 10th, 9th, 8th, we know the 7th person, and so forth like that. Yeah? Does that understand? Yeah, so in lam yu'raf al-mukhtat lahu yusraf ila aqsa. Aqsa means the furthest owner, yu'raf fil Islam, who was known in Islam. Let's say we do know someone who was before Islam, we don't give it to them. وَلَوْ اشْتَبَهَ الدَّرْبُ يُجْعَلْ جَاهِلِيًّا فِي ظَاهِرِ الْمَذْهَبِ. Okay, now let's say you don't know this treasure that you found. You can't tell. You can't tell, is this considered to be something which is a Jahili thing? Or is this considered to be something which is Islamic? Like we can't tell. It's like a silver spoon, let's say. You're thinking, would a Muslim have a silver spoon? But then at the same time, you're thinking, well, maybe he does have a silver spoon. He doesn't use it, but he has a silver spoon. Or maybe it's Jahili, I don't know. So if you're confused, وَلَوْ اشْتَبَهَ الضَّرْبُ. Darb means the design of it. يُجْعَلْ جَاهِلِيًّا. Treat it as Jahili. في ظاهر المذهب. In the Zahir madhab, just treat it as Jahili. لأنه الأصل, because the asl is that before Islam there was Jahiliyyah, so therefore the asl is that it must have come from Jahiliyyah. So the default is it's Jahili unless proven otherwise. وقيل, however, some Hanafis have said no. يجعل إسلاميا في زماننا. In our time, because so many years have gone by. So like Sahib al-Hidayah's in the 6th century. So many years have gone by. Just for now, treat it as Islamic. Right? Because it's going to be very, very rare that this belonged to. Now, for example, if you look at Egypt, Egypt has a lot of stuff that clearly came from Jahili period. The ancient Egyptian different types of jewels and these kind of things. Yeah. So the artifacts that are dug up and treasures that are dug up from those places, those are clearly from Jahiliyyah. That is. So that will be treated as Jahili. And many of them are not in the earth. Many of them are inside of the monuments or inside of the pyramids themselves. لِتَقَادُمِ الْأَحَدِ. So he's saying in our times, he said you should treat it as though it belongs to Muslims. Right? Because تَقَادُمِ الْأَحَدِ means such a long time has gone by. Then, it's difficult to kind of say that, well, it's most likely it's from Jahiliyyah. This is another good example to show the difference of time, where you have a time-bound masala. So where some scholars will give a fatwa or an opinion based upon the era that they were in. Because they were so close to Jahiliyyah, there's a very high chance that this thing belongs to Jahili period. And as the time goes by, like now, over 1400 years have gone by. So if you find something now, it's going to be very unlikely that it's going to come from Jahili. It's possible, it's still possible, could be from Jahili, like the ancient Egyptian things. But it's very unlikely in other places that it's going to be considered to be. Everyone understand? Okay, so I want to just read to you something from Badai Sanai. So what I'll do is I'll get it from Turath. I think I'll just read it from Turath. Yeah, so Badai Sanai. Okay, this is it. Okay, so he says, Madin. Let's go down. Right, so okay, so in Hidayah Sana, I just want to mention this thing. He summarizes this very nicely with regards to the Madin issue. Okay, so he says, Madin al-kharij minhu fil asli naw'an. Anything that comes out from this is of two types. It's mustajsidun wa ma'i'un. It's either a solid or a liquid. Wal mustajsidun, the solid is of two types. Naw'un yadhubu. One type is that which melts, which we call what we call metals. Bil idhabati wa yantabi'u, and can is malleable, bends and folds. Bil hilyati kadhahabi, like gold and silver and hadid, iron, rasas, lead, nuhas, etc. Wa naw'un la yadhubu, and a type that does not melt, yeah, bil idhabati, by heating it. Kal yaqut, like for example precious diamond stones. Balor, marble, aqiq stone. Zumurrud, yeah, these are all different types of stones and precious stones. Feirozaj, yeah, the kind of like bluish turquoise kind of stone. Kuhul, antimony, maghri, zirnikh, jes, nora, all these things. Wal mai known akhar, and there's another type of liquid like nift wal qar. Yeah, nift is crude oil. Qar is like asphalt. Yeah, so he summarizes this in like a very nice way. Yeah, so you guys can read this yourself. And down he says, this is where I was telling you guys about. Yeah. He says, وَيَجُوزُ لِلْوَاجِدِ أَنْ يَصْرِفْ إِلَى نَفْسِهِ. As for the khumus, the finder can give it يصرف إلى نفسه إذا كان محتاجا. He can spend it on himself if he's in need. ولا تغنيه الأربعة الأخماس. أما عندنا فالواجب الخمس الغنيمة في كل يشترط فيه شيء منه شرائط ويجوز دفعه. It's permissible for him to give it to his walidain والمولودين الفقراء. Yeah, the poor children of his. Give it to them because he doesn't follow the rules of zakat. That's where you can find this masla. وفي الركاز الخمس وهو اسم للمعدن حقيقة. It's a name for معدن literally. إنما يطلق على الكنز مجازا. It only applies to kanz مجاز للدلائل, meaning that, like we said, the حقيقة meaning is that which is found in the land. مجاز meaning okay, وفي الركاز. Okay, I just want to find this masla that we're talking about here. Okay, this issue of amma zibaq. So zibaq seems to be, I mentioned this last week but I didn't clarify. Zibaq seems to be some sort of a, it's liquidy. So that's why if you look up zibaq, you'll find things like mercury. So maybe they're talking about mercury. They were unsure about how do we deal with mercury. Is mercury considered to be like iron, or is mercury considered to be like something else, like asphalt or crude oil? Yeah, so this is going to come in Hidayah. Will explain this. So Abu Hanifa has two opinions on this. Early opinion that he treated it like liquid. Later opinion he treated it like metal. Okay, so let's see. Where's that text? Okay, here. So فإذا ملكها المختط له بتمليك الإمام ملكها بجميع أجزائها. So when the مختط له, the guy who the land has been carved out for, he owns it بجميع أجزاء, he owns it with all that its contents of the earth. فتنتقل عنه إلى غيره. So therefore when he sells this off, this is talking about معدن, okay, not the kanz. بخلاف الكنز على ما مر, according to what was mentioned early on. Yeah, so in other words, kanz is something which stays in the land. Okay, you can read the rest of that. I don't want to go into there. Yeah. So let's go back to this then. So anyway, he says, وَمَنْ دَخَلَ دَارَ الْحَرْبِ. Okay, مَنْ دَخَلَ دَارَ الْحَرْبِ. Whoever enters Dar al-Harb bi-amanin, yeah, with safety, meaning whoever enters Dar al-Harb not with the intention of fighting a battle, but simply enters because they want to do business or they want to stay there for a while, etc. They enter with aman, and nowadays we would describe this as entering with some sort of visa. فَوَجَدَ فِي دَارِ بَعْضِهِمْ رِكَازًا. And then they find, so let's say you enter into Dar al-Harb and you find in someone's property, you find rikaz, buried treasure. رَدَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. You have to give it back to them. It belongs to them. تَحَرُّزًا عَنِ الْغَدَرِ. Why do you have to give it back to them? تَحَرُّزًا. And remember, this is in their dar, okay, dar, not in their ard. Ard will be different. Dar is different. So they found it in their dar, in their courtyard. You dug up and you found kanz there. Yeah, so there you have to give it back to them. Why is this? Why can't you keep it? تَحَرُّزًا عَنِ الْغَدَرِ. Because to abstain from being dishonest. So ghadar means to betray someone, to be dishonest. And as Muslims, we're not allowed to betray anyone, whether it's a Muslim or non-Muslim, because we entered their country with aman. Therefore, we do not have the right to cheat them. Yeah, so this is a general rule. Even if people enter and they steal something, that stealing is considered to be impermissible. Their hand will not be cut off because it wasn't done in Dar al-Islam, but they'll be considered to be sinful for doing that practice. Yeah, and there's a lot of masail based upon this as well. So if you read, for example, masail with regards to permissibility of taking riba in Dar al-Harb, they also mention this as well. That they say, so long as they give you the mal min tib nafsin minhum, yeah, with willfully, they give it to you. But if you take it off them unwillfully, meaning if you steal it from them or you force it off them, that's impermissible, that is. لأن ما في الدار في يد صاحبها خصوصا. Because whatever is in the dar, في يد صاحبها, belongs to the person who owns it, خصوصا, exclusively. So if let's say a non-Muslim, let's call him John. John owns a big property, house, and in that house, let's say you're renting it or you're living in there, and you dig and you find treasure, because he's the owner of it, he is technically considered to be the owner of that treasure. And you're not allowed to steal it from him or take it from him in a dishonest way. Okay. وَإِن وَجَدَهُ فِي الصَّحْرَاءِ فَهُوَ لَهُ. And if, however, you were to find it in a desert, إِن وَجَدَهُ فِي الصَّحْرَاءِ. It's another masala now. This is not in someone's property, you found it in Sahara. This is going back to a Muslim land, okay? Or even a non-Muslim land, you can apply. So whether it's a Muslim land, non-Muslim land, لِأَنَّهُ لَيْسَ فِي يَدِ أَحَدٍ الْخُصُوص. Because that does not belong to anyone at all. Just like when in the Muslim land, when you found it in the mountain or the desert. Because there's no one whose hand is there, meaning there's no one ownership, possession is there. فَلَا يُعَدُّ غَدْرًا. So this will not be considered to be, especially if it's in a non-Muslim land, it will not be considered to be being dishonest with them. Yeah, because no one has it and you found it, so finders keepers, it's yours. So that's why if you were to, in this country, if you were to go around with a metal detector in the countryside and you were to find something on property that doesn't belong to anyone, then that would be considered to be permissible for you to take. Yeah, so that belongs to you. وَلَا شَيْءَ فِيهِ. And there's no khumus in it at all. Because remember, the khumus is only there because it's in the Muslim land. The Muslim government has control over it. وَلَا شَيْءَ فِيهِ. And there's no khumus at all in there. And yeah, okay. وَلَا شَيْءَ فِيهِ لِأَنَّهُ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْمُتَلَصِّصِ غَيْرِ مُجَاهِرٍ. Yeah, because the ruling of this individual who is in the desert, let's say you're in the desert, in a non-Muslim land, and you dig the desert, and you find in the desert some buried treasure, your status is like a thief who is not an open thief, غير مجاهر. So it's almost like a thief. You're taking something that doesn't belong to you. You're not a thief. You're almost treated like you're a thief. بمنزلة المتلصص غير مجاهر. But you're not doing it against anyone. It's not like you're really stealing from someone. So that's why that thing is not considered to be problematic. The idea is, in a non-Muslim land, anything that's on earth can belong to anyone. But if someone has possession of it, then you can't take it off them unless they give you permission, whether they're Muslim or whether they're non-Muslim. Okay, so if you look at this hashia, it says over here, وَلَا شَيْءَ فِيهِ أي لا خُمْسَ فِيهِ لأن الخُمُسِ إنما يجب فيما يكون في معنى الغنيمة. Khumus can only apply in something where there is the meaning of ghanima applies. Like where there can be a concept of ghanima. And where can ghanima apply? Ghanima can only apply when the forces, like a strong force of Muslims, goes into a non-Muslim land, and then they have the power to be able to take off the people. Yeah, it's what we call warfare jihad. Like you can't just do jihad, you can't just do vigilantism and go into like a non-Muslim land and cause some disruption and then whatever. You can't do that. You can only do jihad if you have shawka. Shawka means if you have strong enough force, like a military force, that's strong enough to be able to defeat the people. Yeah. So this is the idea. The idea is that this. So إنما يجب فيما. So this is not considered the khumus concept because khumus cannot be like ghanima cannot be attained by someone who is a one-man army. You can't do that. وهي ما كان في يد أهل الحرب, and that is which is first of all belongs to the Ahl Harb. ووقع في أيدي المسلمين. Then the Muslims, the army Muslims, have taken it off them. بإيجاف الخيل والركاب. So إيجاف الخيل والركاب, it means just like in the Quran Allah says, فما أوجفتم عليه من خيل ولا ركاب ولكن الله يسلط رسله. So إيجاف الخيل means when you send your horses, your men, your military, and the rikab to capture the land. And this is why, obviously, we haven't covered this chapter in the chapter of Sir. There's a lengthy discussion regarding ghanima, which is when by force the military takes the property of the enemy. Yeah, whether the non-Muslims take ours or we take the non-Muslims. Yeah. So when the Muslim army takes from the non-Muslims, what happens is that mal now has to go through the khumus. But if it does not go through, if it's not done through force, then it's not called ghanima, it's called fate. So fate is something that has been gained by the Muslims without there being a war. Yes, the Muslims took it without there being a war. But all of this, whether it's ghanima or whether it's fate, can only be treated like this when a strong enough force goes to fight. Does everyone understand this idea? Strong enough force. This is very important to understand, so that like some people will think you can do vigilantism and someone can go around and start killing innocent people, non-combatants. This isn't allowed. Yeah, so you can't do this because you don't have any legitimacy to do this. Yeah, there's no legitimacy. However, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, obviously there was a rule which was al-muslimuna ala shurutihim. When Muslims make a condition, an agreement, they have to stick to that. So when a person enters into a non-Muslim country with aman, then therefore they considered to be someone who has fallen into like a pact with them. You've come into a pact and you have to fulfill that pact. So you can't harm, you can't, do anything like that. Okay. So he says, وَالرِّكَابِ لِأَنَّهُ بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْمُتَلَصِّصِ فِي دَارِ الْحَرْبِ, because he's kind of like treated like almost like a thief in Dar al-Harb. إِذْ أَخَذَ شَيْءٍ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ, because he's technically taken some of their wealth, although there's no one that's claiming it's theirs. وَأَحْرَزَهُ بِدَارِ الْإِسْلَامِ, and then he's brought it back to Dar al-Islam. So he's almost treated like a mutalassis, like a thief, but not in a negative way, but just in the sense that he's taken someone else's wealth. Okay, so that's done. Next. وَلَيْسَ فِي الْفِيرُوزَجِ الَّذِي يُوجَدْ فِي الْجِبَالِ خُمُسٌ. So Firuzaj is referring to, that turquoise sort of like stone that's normally found in places like Afghanistan. So this used to be a very, very expensive. It was supposed to be more expensive than gold. Yeah, in weight. So this was like, I remember when we went to Spain in the palaces in Spain, the Muslims used to use Firuzaj, yeah, or Firuz. They used to use that powder and they used to use that in their paint to paint that kind of like turquoise kind of color. And you've probably seen some mosques in Afghanistan and South Russia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan that are blue in color. That's where it's found. So what about this Firuzaj stuff that you find in these places? Yujad fil Jibal. So because obviously that was known there. There's no khumus there. Why is there no khumus? Simply because there's a hadith, la khumsa fil hajar. And even if this hadith is not considered to be strong, yeah. So if you look at the bottom, it says la zakata fil hajar wa da'afahu is considered to be da'if. Yeah, and then he goes into the whole discussion on this. But it doesn't matter, because our concept was, remember, Khumus is only in those things which are considered to be malleable, that can burn in fire, can melt in fire rather. They can melt in fire. So لا خمس في الحجر. وفي الزئبق, and this like substance which most likely is mercury or something like that. وفي الزئبق الخمس, there is khumus. Abu Hanifa had two qawls in this. في قول أبي حنيفة آخرا, in Abu Hanifa's last qawl. Meaning Abu Hanifa had one qawl which said, the first qawl that he said, he treated it like crude oil. And he said there's no zakat in it. Yeah, because it's a liquid. And his last qawl, he said that no, there is zakat in it. وهو قول محمد, and this is Imam Muhammad's qawl, خلافا لأبي يوسف. Abu Yusuf held the first opinion with. There's actually a long incident. If you read the Hashia, it's got it over here. Yeah, he says خلافا لأبي يوسف حكي عنه, it's reported from him أنه قال كان أبو حنيفة يقول أولا, Abu Hanifa used to say لا شيء فيه, there's nothing in this زئبق. وكنت أقول, I used to say فيه خمس, that's my view. فلم أزل أناظره, I continued to debate Imam Abu Hanifa on this مسألة. وأقول إنه كالرصاص حتى قال فيه الخمس. Yeah, until he said that there is khumus in there because it's like rasas. Rasas is like lead. ثم رأيت أن لا شيء فيه, then I changed my view as well. Yeah, on this. So I used to hold the view that there is khumus, and Abu Hanifa said there's no khumus. Then Abu Hanifa changed his view and said there is khumus, and then I changed my view and said there's no khumus. Yeah, so we kind of like did a whole 180 degrees. فصار الحاصل أن قول أبي حنيفة الآخر وهو قول أبي يوسف الأول وهو قول محمد في الخمس. Yeah, so he believes that there is khumus in there. And the reason, he doesn't mention it over here, but if you read in Hidayah Sanai, he mentions it over there. And he says the reason was because it seemed as though that mercury was used to mix as an alloy with other metals. Yeah, and it would solidify there. So that's what they looked at. They looked at the idea. He looked at the idea that, look, it's liquid at the moment and it becomes solid over there. Yeah. All right. So then he says, ولا خمس, there's no khumus في اللؤلؤ والعنبر. So there's no khumus when it comes to pearls, meaning those pearls that are naturally occurring. But if obviously it's a pearl necklace, someone's got a pearl necklace and they buried it as treasure, then there'll be khumus in there in the Muslim lands. ولا خمس في اللؤلؤ والعنبر, and there's no khumus in amber as well. So amber, what is amber exactly? This is where the early Hanafis seem to have differed in understanding where it came from. Yeah, so like he's going to mention in a bit. Yeah, what are the views on what amber exactly is? In the Abi Hanifa wa Muhammad, وقال Abu Yusuf rahimahullah says فيهما, there is khumus in them. So Abu Hanifa and Muhammad say no khumus. Abu Yusuf says there is khumus. Why is there this difference for? وفي كل حلية تخرج من البحر خمس. And Imam Abu Yusuf says every sort of like item jewelry that is found in the everything expensive that's found in the sea, you give a khumus, just like in the land. So he treats the sea water as being like in the land. Just like if you to find the same things in land, you give zakat, khumus, you have to give it when you find it. لأن عمر, his argument is because Umar radiallahu anhu أخذ الخمس من العنبر. So there's a case where Umar radiallahu anhu was brought amber and khumus was taken from it. Abu Hanifa's argument لهما أن قعر البحر, that the bed of the sea لم يرد عليه القهر. Yeah, so qahr did not apply to it. What does qahr mean? It means that there was no force that had taken over this. What he basically means is that when it comes to land and sea, humans treat land and sea differently. Land is overtaken. People overtake, they overpower it. Yeah, so armies will fight for land. But sea, no one fights for what's at the bottom of the sea. On the bottom of the sea, no one fights for it. So that's why it's like a neutral zone. It's like no one has rights to it. So he's saying, لهما أن قعر البحر لم يرد عليه القهر. There's no qahr there. Qahr was on the land. And the qahr is where the ghanima applies. فلا يكون المأخوذ منه غنيمة. So that's why, because there is no qahr on the bottom of the sea, there is no لا يكون المأخوذ منه غنيمة. وإن كان ذهبا أو فضة, even if you find gold and silver at the bottom of the sea, you still don't have to give any khumus on that. Yeah, why? Because it's all considered to be outside of the realm of qahr, yeah, overpowering. Wal marwiyu, okay, so that's one thing. So this is where the asl changes. Abu Yusuf's asl is comparing it with land, and Abu Hanifa's is not comparing it with land, saying that the whole concept revolves around qahr. Wal marwiyu an Umar radiyallahu anhu, as for what's been reported from Umar, fima dasarahu al bahru, yeah, wa bihi naqul. He says fima dasarahu al bahr. Yeah, what does dasarahu al bahr mean? That, in other words, that which the sea spits out. So amber, what is exactly amber? So some say amber, they believe that amber was a substance that was produced inside the sea. So it came out of the land, produced from there. And others said no, it was actually the defecation of a certain type of sea creature. Yeah, and that seems to be the case now. So if you actually do a search on Google for amber, you'll actually find that amber is actually considered to be, in today's times, is considered to be from Wales. So it's Wales defecation, and it's very expensive. It's very expensive. Like, it can go into the hundreds of thousands. So if you look in the, I think in the Hashia it mentions about, does it mention about amber? Yeah, if it's not there, then it's in what do you call it? Hidayah Sanaya, it's in Radd al-Muhtar as well. Yeah, but remember last week I told you about the lu'lu. وهذا لأن العنبر حشيش, yeah, it's considered to be like a type of plant that grows in the sea, yeah, like a coral. واللؤلؤ ماء مطر الربيع. This is one opinion. Lu'lu is considered to be ماء مطر الربيع, the water from the rain of spring. So spring rain, when it falls in the sea, it goes down, gets inside these clams shells, and then it produces. يقع في الصدف فيصير لؤلؤا. Now, again, this is based upon their old medieval understanding of how these things were produced. Oh, الصدف حيوان يخلق فيه اللؤلؤ. This seems to be more plausible. Sadaf is an animal. Yeah, sadaf is the clams in which the lu'lu is produced. ولا شيء في الماء, and there's nothing in the water itself. Yeah, so this is why, there's like a difference of opinion with regards to this. Anyway, and the last part, وبه نقول. وبه نقول means, and this is the opinion that we take. Yeah, به نقول meaning Abu Hanifa and Muhammad. متاع وجد ركازا فهو للذي وجده وفيه الخمس. Yeah, so متاع, so here it means basically متاع over here is referring to anything besides gold and silver. So for example, you found some clothing, or you found some weapons, or you found some pots and some other things. متاع وجد ركازا, as treasure. What's the ruling of this? فهو للذي وجده, then this will belong to the person who finds it. وفيه الخمس, and there'll also be khumus in that as well. So even if it's not gold and silver, doesn't matter. معناه وجد في أرض لا مالك لها. This is, he wants to clarify. This is referring to if it's found in a land that is not owned by anyone. It's not private property. لأنه غنيمة بمنزلة الذهب والفضة, because it's like ghanima, just like in a battle. If the Muslim army went to a non-Muslim land and they were to take clothes, or they were to take tools, or they were to take cars, non-gold and silver, would they have to give the khumus on that? Of course they would. Yeah, so this is why it's considered to be. But if it was private property, then clearly it doesn't belong to them. Yeah. Okay, and then he says, Wallahu a'lam, Allah knows best. Again, now, if you want to read more, I would definitely encourage you guys to read Bidayah Sanaya, Bahr al-Ra'iq, and Radd al-Muhtar. If you want to read Binaya has pretty much what we just said, has covered that. So Radd al-Muhtar has a few good points in there that you can check out, inshallah. Okay, we'll stop there. If you have any questions, put in the comments and just summarize what we covered today. So today we talked about this idea of, let's say for example, a person was to find buried treasure. What's the ruling of this? So the ruling of this, according to us, we say that you have to give, all the Hanafis agree on this, you have to give 20% of it. Now, if it is buried treasure that seems to have symbols that they belong to Muslims, then it's not treasure, it's actually considered lost property. And the rules of lost property apply to it. And if it is considered to be something which is from non-Muslims, then in that case, you have to treat it as ghanima. So 20% of it goes to the poor, government will deal with that, and the rest goes to you take it. And this is all if it's found in like that kind of land, open land. But what if you find it in someone else's property? Then obviously if you find it in someone else's property, then it actually goes back to the original person for who that land was carved out for. Yeah, so whoever it was carved out for, it goes back to them. This is according to Imam Hanifa and Imam Muhammad rahimahullah. As opposed to Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah, he says it still goes to the guy who finds it. Yeah, because he was the one, the finder. And what about if you don't know who that individual was? Then what? Then in that case, it goes to the first Muslim who you know, the furthest Muslim who owned that piece of land. And what about if you find a pearl in a fish stomach that belongs to you? What if you sell that fish? That pearl still belongs to you. So the fish has now become their ownership, and the pearl has become yours. So this is a kind of like analogy that he's drawing over here with this. Okay, if you don't know if this item is originally belonging to Muslims or non-Muslims, what do? Treat it as non-Muslims, according to one qawl. And the other qawl is, in our days, treat it as Islamic. What if you enter non-Muslim lands and you were to find treasure in someone's property? Then you have to give it to them, because Muslims don't do ghadr. And if you were to find it in their deserts, then it all belongs to you, because there's no ghadr there, but you will still be considered to be like almost like a thief taking from them. Yeah, so that's why it's yours. And it doesn't have any rights of khumus in there, because there was no military force. And what about things like ferozaj and all these kind of precious stones? There's no zakat in these. And what about things like metals that are liquid, in liquid form? Abu Hanifa had two opinions on these. Originally he said no zakat, and then he said yes, there is. And what about pearls and amber? So then in these kind of things, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and Muhammad, there's no zakat. According to Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah, there is no zakat. Khumus, there is khumus on it. Yeah, because of the hadith, and that's it. Okay, so the next chapter is going to be Bab Zakat al-Zuru. Okay, is crude oil included in treasures of the sea? Yeah, so if crude oil can be found, on land, or oil can be found on land, it can also be found in the sea as well. So again, crude oil, there's no ushur on that. There's khumus on that. There's no khumus because it's liquid. Companies pay countries to extract oil. Yeah, so the government, obviously, if they were to send like an agency or a group of people to dig it up, it will still be under the wakala, wouldn't it? Under their permission. So it's like the muwakkil is the owner of it. Yeah. So that's basically, so it's considered to be like government land now. So government has taken it all over. They've kind of put restrictions on it. Okay. Alright guys, Jazakallah khair. See you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.